Welcome to QuietScare, where horror doesn't scream, it whispers. There's something to be said for the things that go bump in the night. The ones that don't make a lot of noise. The ones that find you when you're sure you're safe. These stories are about the real moments when that quiet dread shows up. The episode you're about to hear is a little different, as we're stepping away from the clearly human and into the truly unexplainable. This collection of stories is about sounds in the dark that don't belong to any animal you know, and a whisper that carries an old unkind message. You'll hear about a family who discovers that a lake can hide a terrifying secret, and a student who learns what fear looks like when it's not a person but a force. A like and a subscribe really helps the channel. Also, consider hitting the bell notification so you know when a new episode comes out. The first 10-15 minutes of the episode will contain ads, but after that there will be no more interruptions, so you can get off to sleep. Sleep well and dream dark. I woke to the damp weight of cold on my skin, the kind that makes you unsure whether it's inside you or only in the air. The tent ticked with rain, a soft pattern that sounded far away and close at once. My phone screen burned my eyes. 3 in the morning. I had slept longer than I meant to, heavy as if I'd been pinned to the ground. It was our third night out, and the excitement I'd felt at the start had gone thin around the edges. Jessica wasn't beside me. Her sleeping bag lay unzipped, a dark fold where her shape should have been. I told myself she'd gone to the bathroom. There were about 15 of us on the reserve, tents bunched near one another in a rough oval, and our chaperone slept in a pair of log-built cabins about 800 feet away. I texted her, "Where are you?" and added the dumb face she liked. The one she said made everything sound less serious. The message sat there with its little timestamp. 20 minutes slid by, maybe more. My thumb smudged the screen and left a crescent. I kept wiping on my sleeve, like that would make the message move. She didn't write back. The thunder came so hard and near, it felt like something slapped the tent wall. I flinched and settled again, the rain thickening from tick to steady pour. Jessica was going to be mad about her hair, I thought, the way she always was about the smallest things that felt like control. I closed my eyes and let the rain work itself into a steady line. A sound woke me, one I didn't understand at first. It split the rain. The closest word I had was a scream, but it wasn't human. Not the way a scream lifts and breaks. It was thin and long and wrong, as if a mouth were stretched into a shape no face should take. I bolted upright with my heart running ahead of me. The tent was the same dim cave. Jessica still wasn't back. My text still had no answer. I told myself I'd been a baby long enough. The zipper rasped and I stepped out into the wet. I expected to see other tents stirring, heads popping out, someone else remarking on what we'd heard, the way people do when a noise insists on itself. The reserve lay quiet. No flashlights moved. The rain had slowed to a fine thread, and the full moon hoisted its light over everything, smearing the ground in silver. I pulled my hood up, shoved my hands in the pocket to keep them from shaking, and went toward the cabins. I don't know how to name the feeling that drifted up behind me as I walked. Not a touch, not wind, just a sense of being held in someone's focus. I told myself it was nothing. I told myself anyone who got soaked at 3 a.m. would feel watched by their own shadow. The mud sucked at my shoes and let go. Trees ran a dark line at the edge of the clearing, the kind of forest you think is quiet until you hear every discreet drip. When I got to the nearest cabin, something wedged at the corner of the doorway caught my eye. The cabins were the old type, rounded logs stacked and chinked with pale mortar. The door frames thick. Something was jammed into the space where the log met the door jamb. I pressed the toe of my shoe against it and pushed. It didn't move. I pushed again, harder. On the third shove, it rolled out into the moonlight. A gray cat curled in on itself as if it had tried to be small. Rain slicked its fur into seams, and the cold had made it stiff at the joints. The tail set in a gentle hook that wouldn't relax. My throat tightened with a kind of sadness and fear that felt like one thing. The door handle wouldn't turn. Sometimes they locked it when weather blew hard or when a counselor did the last sweep and forgot the hall key, but I couldn't tell if this was habit or mistake. Either way, it held. I put my forehead to the wood, more for the feeling of something that wasn't moving than for any plan, and in that second the moonlight died. A cloud went over or the rain thickened again. I didn't know. The dark got deep. Behind me, close, something made a sound like it was pulling air through its teeth. It was small and near, more like the small sound a person makes when they're about to speak, but decide not to. It came with the slow, deliberate wet shift of a weight in mud. I kept my face toward the door and told my hands to keep their shape on the handle. My body went cold in a way I didn't know it could. The steps moved closer, each one patient. A low noise came with them, not from the throat, but from a place under the chest where breath goes when you're holding it. I banged on the door. My knuckles hurt. "Hey," I said loud over and over. The word jumping between hits. Between knocks there was a blink of quiet, so thin I could hear water slip from the eaves. The footsteps paused. I hit harder. The lock clicked, and the door cracked open. And Miss Kelly stood there in a big shirt and socks, hair mashed on one side, blinking like she'd stepped into a sun. I slid past her, shoulder tight to the frame, and pulled the door closed. Mud smeared the threshold, and I realized I'd tracked a line across the polished floor. "You're getting mud all over," she said. Not mean, just the sleep still in her voice, wrapped in minor annoyance. I tried to breathe slow. I told her about Jessica, the time, the scream, the cat, the door, the thing behind me, how the moonlight cut out and how the steps moved like someone who knew where they were going. It sounded like a pile of loose parts even to me. She laughed once, a tired little sound, and asked if I needed the bathroom. It was the kind of joke teachers make at 3 in the afternoon to hold the day together. At 3 in the morning it felt like a paper wall. I asked if she'd walk me back to my tent. She smoothed her hair with her palm in a single swipe and looked at the door like it had misbehaved. "Fine," she said, and got an umbrella from a hall closet, one of those clear bubble ones that makes everything farther away. We waited a beat, listening. Nothing out there but the rain and the steady drip off the eaves. She opened the door and we stepped into it. The umbrella made its close-walled sound, rain tapping above us, our footfalls a grease of mud. The moon slid back out. I didn't look toward the forest. I kept my eyes on the dull shine of the tent fabric ahead, how it dimpled at each point where water gathered. At the tent flap I mumbled thanks, and ducked in. She hovered half a second, like she might say something else, then turned away. Jessica lay on her sleeping bag, curled toward the tent wall, hair pulled into a high knot. I touched her shoulder, and she rolled over with her mouth twisted in a smile she hadn't finished forming. "Where were you?" I asked. She sat up on one elbow and told me, barely above a whisper, that she'd been in a different tent with someone she liked. The details came out with little pauses, like she thought she might get in trouble for them. I wanted to be mad. Mostly I felt the relief of a person you thought drowned standing up in shallow water. Before I could say anything that sounded like a lesson, the scream came again. That same thin, stretched sound as if wires vibrated in air. We both sat up straight and looked at each other. She said she'd caught the same sound. Her hand found the edge of her sleeping bag and bunched it. My chest dropped. I told her I didn't think it was an animal. I told her about the footsteps and the way the air had changed by the cabin door. She leaned close and asked if I was saying there was a ghost. She whispered the word like it might be rude to say out loud in a place like this. I shook my head, not because I had a better word, but because I didn't. We lay down. The rain softened. We tried to talk about it a little longer, and then the talk slid off into the kind of silence that isn't agreement, but isn't a fight. I stared up at the tent ceiling and counted the seconds between distant thunder. I thought about the cat and the door and the way the cloud moved over the moon. I tried to picture a bear, or a dog, or a person. None of those shapes fit the sound I'd heard. I woke again to voices outside, the tones quick and high. People talking in those fast bits you use when you're trying to make a plan with the wrong information. Light came through the tent, the bright gray of a day that hadn't decided what it was going to be. Jessica and I unzipped the flap and stepped out. A few yards away, a bonfire had been coaxed back to a low orange bowl. It had the look fires get in the morning, half ash and stubborn. The group had gathered around it, most of the campers in sweatshirts and boots, hair flattened, arms folded across their chests for heat. Miss Kelly stood near the front, one hand on her hip, the other rubbing her face like she could polish a better day out of it. "Have a seat," she said, and sighed. We found a spot on a downed log and sat. She asked if we knew where Michael and Kenny were. Their names made a small space in the air. I looked at Jessica, and she looked at me. Neither of us had seen them. My mind tried to assemble the path from the tents to the bathroom, to the edge of the woods, and it didn't make a picture. Miss Kelly said she'd made the rounds for roll call, and their tent had been empty. She kept talking, voice a little tighter, the sentences stacking against each other. "If this is a joke," she said, "you have to stop." And then she stopped because the woods moved. They didn't appear all at once. First an arm, white shirt streaked with dark, then a shoulder. They stumbled out of the trees like they'd been set down by something that wanted them to walk the last steps themselves. Michael's chest was bare, his ribs an outline under skin, and Kenny's shirt clung with mud. Their eyes were raw, edged in red like they'd been rubbing them for hours, or hadn't blinked in a long time. They went to their knees near the fire. We closed around them without talking, the circle pulling tight. People asked questions, one voice and then another, but their answers were broken, like they'd left parts of their words behind them in the dark. A few syllables got through and none of it held to anything. One of them touched his face and made a sound that wasn't crying and wasn't not. I took off my jacket and put it over Michael's shoulders. He didn't flinch. He didn't say thanks. He let it be there. The smoke had a damp tannic smell like wet leaves burning under it, and my cheeks felt cool even with the heat on my hands. The fire crackled at a low pitch, and the smoke turned and went where it wanted. Miss Kelly said it was over. She said we were done, that she didn't get paid enough to sort out what we were doing to ourselves. It sounded like a joke, and not a joke. She told us to start packing, to coil up ropes and shake the tents, and bring trash to the barrel. People moved because it was something to do. Zippers rasped. Someone shook a tarp and sent a sheet of water into the grass. On the way back to our tent, Jessica looked at me with a kind of sideways grin that wasn't happy. "Please don't say you told me so," she said, almost to the ground. I shook my head. It wasn't that kind of truth. We worked in silence, pulling stakes, rolling fabric, wiping mud with the backs of our sleeves because we'd forgotten the rags. The rain had stopped for real, and the trees dripped slow in their own time. I folded my sleeping bag and missed a line and had to fold it again. In the distance, the cabins kept their shape as if they were part of the land. When I lifted the tent floor, a little pool of clear water rolled toward my shoe and puddled around my heel. I didn't see the cat again. I didn't ask about it. I didn't go back to the door to see if it would open. Later, by the bus, people counted their bags out loud and then again under their breath. A drip from the roof ticked against the wheel well, steady as a metronome, and I wiped my palms on my jeans before I climbed. I put my hand on the rail, stepped up and took a seat by the window. The glass was cold. The trees held still. The day went on. I watched the clearing where our tents had been until it slipped behind us and became trees again. And then just the road. A thin line of water drew itself along the window and lost its shape. The glass stayed cool in my hand. I don't remember the apartment, only the way my mother tells it. Thin walls, a window that wheezed when the wind came from the river, and a radiator that clicked all night like a small animal. It kept time for us. I was born in the winter of '95, and I was quiet. Too quiet, my mother says. She asked my grandmother and my aunt to stay for a while, to help with the days in the cold. She says it like a practical thing, but I know it came from a worry she couldn't name. They took turns with the small jobs, laundry and bottles, a quick run to the store, watching the light across the nursery wall. My father left early and came home late, never able to shake the chill from the stairwell. He never felt anything wrong with the nursery. My mother didn't either. They called it a nice room. a sunny one when the sun could find it. But my grandmother and my aunt had a different way of paying attention. They would step into that little room and hold on to the door frame, with one hand waiting for the small tells, how the curtain bellied once and then stilled, how the heater ticked twice and went quiet as if those sounds might sort themselves into meaning. After, they would come back to the kitchen slower than they went in. "It's heavy in there," my grandmother said once. Not to start a fight, just to put words to a feeling. She rubbed at her wrist, an old habit when she was upset. A little draft slipped out past the nursery door each time it opened, thin as a thread you could lose between your fingers. My aunt didn't say anything then. She just kept the baby monitor near her tea. The red light sharp in the dim. For weeks the pattern held, the double check of the crib, the quiet talk between the older women when they thought my mother couldn't hear, the small ways a room can be avoided. If you stood in the hallway and looked through the nursery door, you could see the crib against the far wall, white bars set close and a thin curtain breathing inward from the vent. It was a small room, the kind that asks you to lower your voice. My aunt would stand there, not crossing the threshold, just watching the rise and fall of a new chest, the way a baby's breath pauses sometimes and scares you more than any loud cry. She has always carried a few beliefs the rest of us don't. That's how people talk about it. But I think it was also true that she noticed things and kept noticing until it hurt. When I was a year old, the air changed only by a degree or two. We were into the dark months again. That evening, my aunt took the last shift. My mother went to lie down. My grandmother folded dish towels in the living room, stacking them on the low table. The apartment had cooled early, and every corner was full of shadows. Thin ones where the lamp legs touched the floor, broader ones in the hallway, the kind you don't see until you go looking. My aunt checked the crib and saw me asleep on my back, one fist tucked against my chest. She stepped back out to the hallway to fetch a sweater from the coat hook. She checked the baby monitor out of habit and turned the volume one notch lower so the static wouldn't carry. It was not far. 10 steps there and back, and in those 10 steps she says she felt a tug at her attention, like the air had a seam in it. She paused. When she came back to the nursery door, she stopped short. She didn't cross in. She didn't call out. She told me later, her eyes watered on their own. The nightlight cast a little curve of brightness against the crib rails, and in that curve stood a figure between the soft glow and me. A woman, she said, not young, bent in her middle or her neck. She could not say which. Thin gray hair gathered back, and a long dark dress like something for church or a funeral, made small by time. My aunt held the doorframe again, the paint cold. She listened. The voice lifted and fell near the crib. Not loud. None of it was loud, but clear enough. The woman leaned as if confiding. My aunt said she heard the words, too many of them, all turned in the same direction. That I was wrong. That I was marked. That I would go quiet and keep going quiet until there was nothing left. The words did not make sense to her except as a kind of spite. She felt it in her throat. She watched the woman's mouth move, saw the old shoulders, the crook to the back that gave her a slant like she was being pulled forward by something she did not want to face. For a moment my aunt could not make herself move. It felt like when you are at the top of a staircase in the dark, and you cannot take the first step because you cannot tell where the floor is. When she found her voice, she didn't scream. She is proud of that. She said a few simple words, the way she'd been taught by people who believe that the world is crowded and only some of us know it. She told the woman to leave us alone. She told her to go. She lifted her hand, not to touch, just to draw a boundary. There was a pause, like the room itself was thinking it over, and in that held breath, the nightlight hum seemed louder than it was. The air didn't move, not even the curtain. My aunt didn't breathe for a count. Then the woman turned her head. My aunt said the eyes found hers like two small coins at the bottom of a shallow bowl. Nothing dramatic happened. No wind, no slam, no flash. The woman's expression didn't show anything like sorrow or rage. It was a plain, unflinching look, the kind a stranger gives you when neither of you is sure who should move first. Then the woman took one step toward the door. She passed close enough that my aunt said she felt a brush of cool air, and something like a smell you cannot place. She moved out into the hallway and kept on without changing her pace, and in the space of the next few breaths, the shape came apart in the ordinary darkness and wasn't there. My aunt stayed where she was and watched me sleep. Her hands shook as if she had been out in the winter too long. She went to the living room without turning on more lights. She told my grandmother, not in a burst but the way you tell someone bad news, you need them to absorb slowly. While the steam from a cup warmed her knuckles and the stacked towels left a faint lint on my grandmother's palm, my grandmother listened with her hand on the folded towels and then put her palm flat, steadying herself. She did not go to look right away. She said a prayer under her breath. She pressed her thumb too hard into a fold and had to smooth it twice, a small mistake she didn't correct with words. My aunt stood there and let the prayers cover her. They told my mother in the morning, over coffee. My mother set the mug down and folded her arms and said they were scaring themselves. She looked at me in the high chair, at my cheeks and the way I watched the steam rise. She was not trying to be cruel. She wanted the world to be manageable. She wanted rooms to be rooms. Over the following weeks, my grandmother joined my aunt in their peculiar vigilance. Sometimes they would exchange glances, and one of them would go and stand in the nursery doorway for a minute like a post. Sometimes my grandmother would whisper a verse. Once, when the apartment was especially cold, my grandmother said the shape seemed to gather where the light curved off the crib. When she stepped closer, only the hum of the monitor and the thin rasp of my breath remained. She would not repeat the words the figure said. She just shook her head. She would sit in the rocking chair afterward and rub her wrist and wait for my mother to come in so she could say it was time for a walk. No one touched me with anything but care. There were no marks. I didn't get sick. The unease stayed in the adults and moved through the days like a low hum. You can't trace back to a source. My father would come home and hang his coat and lift me and kiss the top of my head, then run a thumb along the window latch to feel it sit. The kind of fix he trusted. He slept well. He dreamed of regular things. The apartment itself had no story we knew. It was one of many along a stretch of road not far from the highway, with a small grocery on the corner and a bus stop where people stared down the street like they could see it coming. All I have now are their accounts layered on top of a place I can't remember. The woman's gray hair, the crook to her posture, the steady unkind whispering, the way my aunt says she felt watched even as she stood guard. We moved a few months after that, early in the spring, for reasons that belonged to other parts of our lives. Work and rent and a friend who knew someone with a better place. The packing took a weekend. My aunt wrapped the dishes and my grandmother labeled boxes in a careful hand. My mother bundled me into a puffy coat and carried me from room to room in a slow pass, checking the closets and the bathroom one last time, pulling the curtain cord in the nursery like a small goodbye. They say the apartment felt empty the day we left, lighter in a way that made them impatient to be done. My aunt stood in the nursery one last time, the door open, the crib already dismantled, nothing left but the circle in the carpet where the rocker had been. She listened and heard nothing she could name. She put her hand flat on the doorframe and said nothing at all. We drove to the new place on a route that cut past the river and up under the interstate. The air in the car was warm and dry. I fell asleep. In the new house, my mother set the crib in a different corner. The window there opened without complaint. The radiator sighed and gave off a workable heat. She tested the window once, then again, to feel the catching gauge and the faint change in the room's air settle. My aunt stayed the first night and kept the baby monitor near her tea. She said she would. Nothing else happened. As I got older, the story came to me piece by piece, told with the practical words my mother favors and the careful ones my grandmother and my aunt use when they mean to be understood, but not believed. I was always a quiet child. In school, I learned to raise my hand so teachers wouldn't forget I was there. In crowds, I let other people go first. I don't know if that has anything to do with what they say happened in that room. The mind wants to thread it all together. The mind wants clean lines. When I imagine it now, I try to keep it small. A nightlight making a soft arc on white bars. A woman with a bent back. not alive, leaning in to say things that had no power except the power to unsettle the living. My aunt saying a few firm words and then pressing her lips together and waiting. My grandmother carrying towels like a task. Could save you. My mother's hands on the curtain cord, the plastic bead clicking against the window frame. My father checking the window latch, because that was what he knew how to fix. At night sometimes, when I can't find sleep right away, I run a finger along the edge of a door and feel for old chips in the paint, then set the latch with a soft click. Then I turn out the light and let the dark be just the dark. I sleep like anyone else. The bar smelled like fryer oil and wet coats. That winter bar smell that clings. I met him because Mary was in love and that makes her turn into a matchmaker. She said I should meet this guy she knew, call him Joe. And I said yes, because I didn't want to watch her worry about me dying alone. We did a group thing first, somewhere loud with a lot of laughter and a few cheap drinks, and he didn't set off any alarms. He was a little too eager, a little too pleased with his own jokes, but nothing that would make you call someone. At the end of the night, he asked to see me again. I said sure. Tim, Mary's boyfriend, training for medicine, the kind of quiet mind you trust, walked me to the train. He said something felt off about Joe. I said I thought so too. Neither of us could name a crime. Tim said to be careful. I said I would, and we hugged goodnight under the station lights. We texted after that. The more we wrote, the worse it felt. He had a way of dragging the conversation into the kind of swamp where everything is about him and what you think of him. At first, I tried to patch it with reassurances. That turned into a rope he wanted to pull. His self-loathing wasn't shy. He wanted me to see it and fix it. I didn't want to see him again, but Mary was invested. She's sweet, and when sweet people get momentum, it can carry you with it. I invited him to a club event instead of a private date. I figured a room full of people I knew would make it safe, like placing a chair against a door. Afterward, we drifted along the riverwalk near the pedestrian bridge downtown, the kind of stretch where food trucks park up on summer nights and kids toss crumbs to gulls by the railing. He was better in person than on a screen, or maybe that's just how crowds work. They make edges look smooth. We parted in the busy station. I thought I'd steer it toward being friends and let it settle there. A couple weeks later, he called and told me he was going to kill himself. It was 10 at night. I went out on the patio because I didn't want to pace holes in the floor. He said he had a plan. He said he meant it. Every time I tried to end the call, he said if I hung up, he would do it, and I couldn't leave someone alone with that. So I talked him down, and then he rose up again, and I talked him down again. He kept breathing into the phone while I watched the dark line of the trees and the light behind them grow. When the sun cleared the pines, he finally let me off. He said thank you, and for a second I thought maybe I had done something good. Then he said, bright and thrilled, that it was the best night of his life. Then he hung up. I sat there with my legs sticking to the cheap plastic chair, listening to a bird that hadn't stopped singing the whole time, and let the feeling move through me, from worry to anger, to something like a cold, flat understanding. The chair squeaked. It wasn't about dying, it was about control. I decided I would never see him again. Mary was mortified when I told her. She kept brushing her bangs back, a nervous tick she swore she'd broken, and said she was sorry 3 times in a row, softer each time. She said Joe was not well. She told me to call the police if he showed up anywhere near me. I didn't think he could find me. I'm careful. I keep my number and address behind layers. P.O. box for parcels, campus mail for anything else. Because I learned young how fast a home can turn into a map for someone determined. That old rule probably saved me. When I broke things off, Joe threatened to kill himself again. I messaged Mary and she got their mutual friend to check on him. For a few days, I thought maybe that would hold. Then the phone calls started after midnight. The vibration skittered across the nightstand, a small insect of a sound, and when I lifted it, the glass was warm from my hand, and the screen washed the room pale. They came at 2 and 3 in the morning, and the caller didn't speak. He breathed. You can know a person in the sound of their breath. I blocked the number, Then the next one, then the next. After a handful of new numbers, the calls turned private. No caller ID, nothing I could press to make it stop. I couldn't refuse every private call. A whole branch of my family keeps their numbers private after a scam a few years ago. If something went wrong in the night, that's how I'd hear. So every time the phone flashed private number, I picked up. Most were him, some were my family. I had to treat them all like the second kind, because I couldn't bear the thought of missing a real emergency. And I couldn't bear the thought of him giving up on me and turning up at Mary and Tim's. He knew where they lived. I didn't owe him my sleep or my peace. But the risk wasn't only mine. Some nights I slept with one ear uncovered, a habit I picked up without meaning to, as if hearing would help me more than rest. The months found their rhythm. I'd brush my teeth, set the phone face down, and lie still in the dark until it started. Sometimes it was one call, sometimes 3. The air felt heavier when I put the phone to my ear. I could hear my own breath and his, and nothing else. It didn't sound angry. It sounded patient. One night the phone rang at 3. The screen lit the ceiling. I watched it pulse and pictured Mary Street in the dark. The way the porch lights on her block. Time out if no one moves. I sat up and looked at it and didn't touch it. The ring went on, and I watched the digits of the clock turn. I had never let it go to voicemail. If I didn't pick up, he could sit outside Mary's building and wait for her to leave for work. That's how my mind worked by then. A chain of small, ordinary moves that added up to danger. I had a memory then, quick and plain. When I was in high school, my dad used to call early if he was headed to a shift before sunrise. Sometimes I'd be the one who answered, half awake, voice low from sleep. He'd think I was my brother. My voice is deep for a woman, and sleeping sinks it further. He'd say John's name and I'd laugh and hand the phone over. John's been gone for a while now. He died a year before I met Joe. Losing him changed the shape of everything. The memory landed and held still. I cleared my throat. I lowered my voice as far as I could, not trying to act, just letting it sit low. The phone kept ringing. I slid my thumb up and put it to my ear. For a second, I saw my brother's varsity photo in my head. Creases from a wallet fold, and I didn't push it away. "Hello," I said, low and rough, letting the word hang there like I might be someone else. Nothing. No breath. No made-for-soundtrack rasp. A thin hiss of the line. I said it again. The same way. The silence held for a moment. Then he hung up. I sat there with the phone against my knee and laughed once. Quiet and a little shaky. Every other time, he would stay as long as I let him. He never, ever hung up first. It felt like a door catching in its frame. Small sound, big relief. I let myself be hopeful. I didn't turn off the ringer. I just lay back down and listened to the house sounds show up one by one. The fridge motor, a car passing, a neighbor's pipe knocking like someone rapping their knuckles on wood in another room. He didn't call the next night. The phone still felt heavy when I set it down. He didn't call the week after that. The month turned, then another. It's been over a year now. The calls stopped. I haven't forgotten the rest. People who knew him tell me he talks about me. They say he told some folks we slept together, which we didn't. He said worse things too. The kind you don't want to write down because it looks like you're inviting them if you name them. A person close to him, someone he believes, told him I moved away. I haven't yet, I will. I'm finishing school and then I'm going to put a lot of miles between us and call that safety. For now, we're 2 campuses and a half hour of train apart. It doesn't feel far when you're counting in worst case scenarios. It's what I have. There were good things. Mary is done with matchmaking. That habit burned out in a single season. She apologized more than once, and I told her she didn't make him do any of it. It's true, and it isn't. You can't predict people. You can stop pushing them at your friends. She knows that now. The city hasn't changed. People still lean over the river rail at dusk to take photos. The station floors still smell faintly of spilled coffee in the morning. On trash day, the bins line the curb and tip when the truck grabs them. And every time I hear the sharp clatter of plastic on asphalt, I pause and listen. My hands go still, and then I go back to what I was doing. Sometimes I think about the way my own voice sounded that night. It was close enough to startle me. I hadn't heard anything like John in a while. You don't expect the living to carry the dead forward in something so small. I think he would have liked knowing that some part of him still protected me. It's a strange kind of comfort, but comfort all the same. I wish I could say I stopped looking over my shoulder. I rinse a mug and set it to dry, check the lock without thinking, and let the kettle click off in its own time. Most nights nothing happens. I brush my teeth, set the phone face down, and sleep. In the morning I make coffee and open the blinds. The trees behind the building are the same trees they were the night the call stopped. The light through them is the same kind of light. By the time we cut the engine, the lake was holding the last light like a warm plate. I remember the boat cutting a smooth line through the water at sunset. The heat was lifting off the lake in slow breath. Behind us, the sky went from pale orange to a color you only see once, and can't name again. I took a few pictures with my phone and then just watched the shoreline go by. Brush, rock, the empty slips where people tied up during the day. It felt like the kind of evening where nothing would happen. We eased up on a strip of shore with flat ground above the waterline. Everyone moved without talking much, carrying coolers and a bundle of poles, the camping bins we kept in a garage all year. The kids ran in circles. Someone found kindling, and someone else split a few pieces of wood. We stuck hot dogs on sticks and turned them slow over the fire until the skins blistered. I could feel the day letting go. When the light was truly gone and the kids had quieted, most of the men walked up shore to another campsite. You could see it through the dark by the flicker of their fire, and hear a laugh now and then, carried thin by the breeze. I was tired and chose the boat instead of a tent. The idea of rocking a little on the water felt good. I took a blanket, climbed up, and lay down along the bench. The hull tapped the shore now and then. I fell asleep to that sound. I woke to music, too loud and wrong for the hour. The kind that blares without warmth, all beat and cheap speakers. I sat up disoriented and squinted toward the edge of our camp. My aunt was already moving. A red pickup eased down the slope and stopped so close to the water the tires glossed with lake shine. The engine idled rough, a faint gasoline tang coming and going on the breeze, and one headlight threw a pale oval across our coolers. The music poured out of it, something in Spanish, fast and heavy. One of the toddlers started wailing from a tent, the small lost cry that made my chest ache. My aunt walked the sand to the driver's window and leaned down to speak. I couldn't hear words, only the rise and fall, the gesture of her hand toward our tents, toward the sound of the child. The music kept going. She stood there a moment longer, like maybe her staying would soften them, but then she came back up the shore. She sat near the fire with her arms wrapped across herself and stared out. From the boat I called softly to ask what they said. She shook her head once. The baby's crying thinned and then spiked again. We waited. 10 minutes, maybe more. The night had a way of stretching time flat. My aunt got up again and walked back. She tried another approach, palms out, small steps so she wouldn't seem like she was pushing. The men in the truck answered and turned the volume higher. I saw one of them hit the side of the door with the flat of his hand like he was drumming, but the sound was hard instead of playful, a dull clatter that made me flinch even from where I sat. She stood her ground one more breath and then came back to us. My older cousin rose from his chair, jaw tight, then sat when my aunt touched his sleeve and said not yet. She wanted someone who could speak Spanish to come with authority, not anger. Her hand kept patting the same pocket of her jacket like she was checking for something that wasn't there. From the boat, I watched the driver's door open. One man got out, walked to the bed of the truck, lifted the tailgate enough to reach in, and took something. I couldn't see what it was. It was too dark, and I was too far. From where I sat, I couldn't name it, only the shape of a reach and a pause. Later, my aunt would say it looked like a gun, and the way her voice went thin when she said it sat with me. He slid back into the cab and the truck stayed there idling, lights haloed by dust. The men from our group came back along the shore all at once, boots on grit, quiet, their faces unreadable in the firelight. We told them what had been going on. My uncle listened, head tilted like he was catching rain. Then he and 2 older cousins walked to the red truck. I stood up on the boat without meaning to, one hand on the rail. The night felt tight around us. You could hear the water tapping the hull and the radio hammering. My uncle spoke, and the music didn't drop. Then the music did cut off, sudden, and even that silence sounded hostile. Voices rose. A strike on metal rang out, clean and mean. The radio cut, and the hush that followed felt louder than the song. I lost the distance for a moment, like the lake had carried the sound closer than it was. I climbed down from the boat because my hands were shaking and it felt worse to be elevated, like I was on display. People started moving with purpose. My cousins rolled up sleeping bags without bothering with straps. Someone dumped the meltwater out of a cooler and left it open. We began to throw things on the boat in the order they came to hand. I asked what was happening, and no one answered. My aunt's voice kept saying hurry even when her mouth was closed. My uncle and the cousins came back at a fast walk. The truck's engine revved and backed away from us, sand spitting under the tires. My uncle's face was tight and his hands were empty, which struck me as odd for reasons I didn't have time to untangle. When I asked, they told me in pieces as we moved. The short of it was this: when they tried to talk, the men in the truck showed a gun and pointed it toward my uncle. They pulled the trigger and it jammed. In that instant of misfire, my uncle seized the weapon, and my cousins threw punches. One of the men went down against the door and slid out of sight. A tooth had come out. Someone said it like he didn't want to own the picture. The men in the truck promised they would come back. We didn't need more explanation than that. The kids were still half asleep and trembling. We packed fast and wrong, knocking sand into tubs and not caring. Cold water sloshed against my shoes when a cooler tipped, and my hands came up gritty and wet no matter what I grabbed. The fire was left to die on its own, ash lifting in thin sheets. My uncle pushed the boat off and jumped in after, and the motor coughed then caught. We slipped out into the lake with the load piled wrong, my aunt on the floor with a child in each arm. The shoreline slid away. The red truck sat with its light still on, then turned and vanished behind a low hill. We crossed to a cove he knew that you could only reach by water, a pocket of rock and brush ringed by steep slopes. We nosed the bow against a shallow rock shelf and tied off to a scrub root, the hull ticking lightly when a wake found us. The motor went quiet, and for a while all I could hear was what lived on that side of the lake. Crickets, a night bird far off, the occasional soft slap from under the bow. We made a low camp, no tents this time, just blankets and bodies, and a ring of stones around a little fire we didn't let grow. The fear came on me in waves, like a fever breaking and returning. Even lying down, I felt the shake in my hands. My small imperfection showed itself there. I chewed the inside of my cheek until I tasted iron and had to press my knuckle against my mouth to make it stop. No one slept much. Once in the dark, my cousin whispered that maybe they wouldn't find us. No one answered. I watched the sky think about morning. At first light, the world presented itself like a photograph developing. Shapes emerging, then color, then the noise of day coming back. The lake flattened out in gray. My aunt and I took the boat across to our original stretch to see if the other family had coffee. The sand there held fresh tire swirls laid over our footprints, loops that crossed and doubled back like someone got impatient turning around. They looked recent in that way. Tracks do before the wind settles them. Their fire was down to a cave of orange. The men from that camp looked like they hadn't slept. When my aunt asked, they told us that the men had come back in the night with more people and more guns. They were loud and angry and asking where we'd gone. They had waited a while and then left not long before we arrived. We nodded and did not make a plan with words. We didn't call anyone. We didn't talk about record numbers or badge names. I don't have a reason to give for that satisfies me now. We went back to our cove and told the others, and then we made the day what we could. The sun finished rising. We swam with the kids close and kept an eye on the mouth of the cove. We ate what we had and poured out the rest of the meltwater and tried to laugh at small jokes. By afternoon, the air felt normal again, which is its own kind of strangeness. When we finally loaded the boat for home, we checked the shore once more and saw nothing but our old prints giving way to new ones. The place where we'd sat had no sign of us but a circle of stones and a damp square where the cooler had been. On the ride back, I looked at the pictures I'd taken on the way in. The sky soft and unbothered. I tightened a strap that had come loose and brushed sand from the seat with the back of my hand. I tilted the screen to cut the glare, and then put the phone face down on the seat. I can tell you that no one got hurt, and we swam and drank and went home. I can tell you that the gun didn't fire when it might have, that we left when we did. These are facts that fit in a row. The rest of it, the part that wakes me some nights, is just the thought of what almost happened, and the way a lake can hold quiet over a thing like that and look the same in the morning. I was 10 or 11 when we lived in a split-level duplex outside Nashville, the kind with a deep backyard that sloped toward a crooked fence, and a front porch where bikes collected like driftwood. On the east side of the city, a few turns off Gallatin Pike, our block was the kind where porches faced each other like patient neighbors. 3 bedrooms, brown carpet, a narrow hallway that held a chill even in July. It was a good street. Kids in the cul-de-sac, a school bus that came early, summer games that lasted past dinner. I remember liking my room well enough except for the closet, a long low thing with sliding doors that never settled right on the track. Every night, even with the doors shut, I had the sense something behind them was paying attention to me. I told myself I was being a kid. Shadows, bed springs, the old stories. The house liked to play tricks. Light switches clicked in empty rooms. The living room lamp would die, and then flare back like someone had walked past it with a hand on the shade. The television would pop on by itself to snow, its blue cast washing the couch in a way that made the cushions look soaked. My father blamed the wiring. He said it like a solved problem. Old place, old wires. He was calm about it, and because he was calm, my mother was, and I learned how to shrug. Saturdays, we'd drive past the big sign over Ellington Parkway and count the turns to the grocery. One afternoon after school, I let myself in, dropped my backpack by the couch, and pulled a bowl of cereal without milk, just to eat it dry. Nickelodeon came on, the noise bright and harmless. I spread my math on the carpet, pencil behind my ear. Outside, you could hear a mower somewhere, the lazy drone settling into my skull until it was almost comfort. The hallway held that stale, cool air. Old houses keep in their center, like the vents were breathing softer there, and the sound seemed to move inside that stillness. I counted sides and angles, and lost time the way you do when you're small, when the afternoon feels like a room you can walk around in. That was when I heard it. A sound from the back of the house, the master bedroom my parents used. Not a single hit or thump. It had a steady paper-dry shiver to it, like someone rummaging in a drawer, like plastic bags being folded and unfolded. Wrestling is what I would have called it then. Just that word, simple and wrong and right enough. I glanced toward the front window again, and the driveway was still empty, the light slow and honey-colored across the gravel. I knew they weren't home. Their cars weren't in the driveway. It was still early. The light through the front windows a slow honey color. I could have gone to the neighbors. Mr. Lane worked nights and was usually awake, smoking on his stoop, but the idea of telling a grown man I was scared of a noise felt worse than the noise. If it was a burglar, I told myself, what would a burglar want with our bathroom? I stood, wiped my hands on my shorts. The TV kept chattering. I turned the volume down with the remote, and it clicked lower with the smallest resistance. That stiff feeling that meant the batteries were tired. I stepped into the hallway and moved toward my parents' room. Their door was open. I could see the bedspread, a quilt with half the squares faded from the sun, and the line of the bathroom door beyond it cracked open. Before I stepped across the threshold, my mouth did something I didn't plan. Mom, Dad. My voice slipped out into the room, soft as if I might make someone mad. What answered back wasn't words at first, but a laugh stripped of kindness. A dry little cackle that sounded like a throat with no water left in it. Then a voice, old and worn like the laugh, but quick, like it had been waiting. "No, Dad, is that you?" it said, and the cadence was mine, but crooked. It landed in me the way a bad taste does, sudden and hard to explain. The room went smaller. I didn't run. I thought if I moved toward it, the dream would snap and I'd wake on the carpet with a pencil mark across my cheek. My eyes watered. I looked at the bathroom door. The rustling came from in there now, a little louder, not hurrying to hide. I took the last step and put my hand on the light switch by the doorframe. The plastic was smooth and a little warm from the afternoon. The bathroom light came on without a blink. There was no one inside. The shower curtain hung straight. The small window over the toilet showed the elm tree out back, with its leaves moving in a breeze that didn't reach me. It smelled faintly of the lemon cleaner my mother liked, sweet over a whisper of drain metal, the kind of mix that tells you no window has been open long. On the counter, combs and a pill bottle, and my mother's hairbrush had been knocked over, splayed out like someone had dragged an arm across them. A pair of nail clippers dangled in the sink, catching the light. The bath mat was wrinkled. The trash lid was off, on the floor like a small hat. I turned to leave, not even thinking it through, just letting my body try to get big in the doorway of the bedroom again, and my toe caught the low aluminum lip of the sliding closet track that ran a notch past the doorway, a snag I knew was there and still forgot. I went down hard on my chest, the breath gone from me. It knocked the wind out of me. The carpet rubbed my forearms. For a second, the world was quiet except for the television, which had kept on going, voices bright and far away. I stayed there, face against the brown carpet, and cried. It wasn't a dramatic kind of crying. It was the leaking kind. The kind that comes when you're embarrassed and hurt and sure you're about to be revealed as foolish. I said my mother's name. I said it small. I felt the damp from my breath come back at me from the carpet fibers. One strand of my hair stuck to my lip and I couldn't seem to free it. I thought about being an hour on the floor, and then I knew it was only moments. The way a microwave minute can feel elastic when you stand waiting for it. I pushed myself up and looked back into the bathroom one more time. The mirror held only what it was supposed to hold. The things on the counter were still wrong. The little silver clippers still hung in the sink. I felt nothing in the doorway. No breath or hand or push. Just my own heart making itself known. I walked down the hall fast, not running because running felt like a rule I didn't want to set for the house to follow. In the living room, I gathered my worksheet and my pencil, and the little pile of cereal, sweeping it all into my arms, with the clumsy scoop of someone trying not to drop anything, and dropping 3 things anyway. One Cheerio rolled under the couch and I let it go. I turned the television off with my thumb. It made that faint sigh it always made when the tube shut down, as if cool air were being let into a jar. Through the window I could see the dead black square of the TV screen holding my shape for a second, then letting it slip. Outside on the porch, the boards were warm under my knees, where I set my papers. The porch paint was flaking at the edges. A bee investigated the railing and lost interest. I could see up and down the block, the neighbors' porches, the patchy lawns, the mailboxes that leaned in sympathy. I did my homework there with my back against the siding, the pencil leaving faint dents when I pushed too hard. I waited for the sound of tires in the drive. When my mother's car turned in, the relief hit me like stepping into shade. I told her everything before we were all the way through the door. She listened. She set her keys in the bowl by the door and stood a moment, scanning the living room like she could read what had happened from the cushions. And then we walked the short hall together. My father came in behind us a few minutes later, work shirt still warm from the sun, and he went straight to the switch and clicked it twice. He checked the bathroom. He tapped the light switch twice and told me again about wires and old houses. He touched the shower curtain like he expected a person to be behind it, and then made a small joke that missed the mark. They said people can doze off without meaning to. They said TV can put pictures in your head that stick. We had dinner. The evening came on as it always did, the sound of a game show host rising and falling across the room, the soft swearing when a drawer stuck. I don't remember any point that day when I woke up. There wasn't a second when a dream cracked and the carpet became a carpet again. It all ran forward. Night came. I slept as much as you can with your ear tuned to a room you can't stop watching. Nothing like that happened again. There were the usual clicks and pops and the way the hall felt wrong in the middle of the night, but no voice. We moved a year later, closer to the interstate, a place with different problems. I grew up in the regular way people do. The odd thing went into the drawer of my mind with the rest, a small object you sometimes find your hand on. There are rooms I don't take my time in. Even now, I don't like small bathrooms with doors that don't swing quiet. I don't like the way a mirror carries a house behind you. If I hear a laugh from another room, a recording, a television, it can ring the wrong way. When I get up at night and pass a bathroom door, I keep my eyes on the floor, or on the hinge, or on the light switch plate with its little crack in the corner. I tell myself about wiring. I tell myself about age and settling. I don't say anything out loud if I can help it. If you ask me whether it was a dream, I can say the right things. I can line them up like objects on the bathroom counter. A child alone, afternoon light, the way the mind throws its voice when it wants company. I can talk about sound traveling in a house with thin walls. I can mention how footsteps upstairs can be the house itself. All of that sits fine beside the other thing, which is that I heard my own words come back at me in a voice that wasn't mine and didn't hope to be. Most days I don't think about that house. It comes back when a switch is sticky, when a television flares with snow without asking, when I stand at a bathroom door and touch the plastic plate and feel the little ridge where it meets the wall. On those days I breathe and check the mirror like anyone else and move on. I do the small task that's in front of me. Wash my hands, dry them on a towel that doesn't match anything, and turn off the light with my thumb. My thumb finds that same little ridge on a lot of plates now, like the house taught me where to press. Then I step out and pull the door mostly shut, leaving it a finger's width from the frame. The vents rattled like coins in a jar, and left the desks cool to the touch, so you noticed your forearms before you noticed the clock. I never meant to work in a juvenile facility. I was 21, still at Bowling Green, chasing an English education degree and writing bad fiction on nights I should have been reading. The placement was supposed to be routine classroom hours, a line on a resume. It turned into a place I kept going back to because the kids gave me more to think about than any lecture hall did. I can't say where it is or what it looks like inside. I kept the placement details off the record. The city I commuted to isn't Bowling Green, and I won't name it here. It was good work. It made me steadier. They wrote like their lives depended on it. Half the time it was jokes and swagger. The other half it was the kind of truth you feel uncomfortable holding. One kid handed me a story titled The Demon Collector. They'd introduced a figure that could slow time, open barriers, and pull thoughts out of a group it haunted, the Timeless Sinners. The premise hit me in a way I felt in my throat. I scribbled the title on a sticky note and stuck it on my laptop. I told them it was a great idea. Then I asked where it came from. They said someone once broke into their house. The room pulled toward us when they said that chairs dragged a little closer. I remember the smell of dry erase marker and whatever cheap detergent the facility used on the floors. I had a rule about letting stories tell themselves, so I didn't push. I just nodded and waited. They said they were a lot like me at that age, which made the kids around us snicker. Most nights they killed the lights and took the stairs two at a time, then slept angled toward the doorway on principle, like keeping one eye on a hallway you don't expect to change. They laid out the house without embellishment. Basement where the game station lived, the stairs, the second floor landing, the bathroom right there at the top. So close to the stairs you could look into the mirror and catch the front door downstairs, like the house was built to keep an eye on itself. They had been in the basement for hours that night, 7 by their count. The upstairs was dead quiet. No music, no TV, no footsteps, just the hum you only notice when everything else shuts up. They flipped on the light over the stairwell. It made that hard-edged triangle across the wall. They started up, quick like always, and when they reached the landing, their eyes snagged on something in the bathroom. Not a person? Not exactly. The door swung inward on right-side hinges. The thing sat just above the middle plate, where the paint is rubbed thin. It looked like an eye, wide and fixed, set where it shouldn't be, in the strip of dark beyond the threshold. It was just a suggestion in the black. They told me it was the kind of thing you know is foolish even as the skin on your neck tightens. They ran. They didn't say I ran. They said it like a report, like they'd been watching someone else move. I listened for the bathroom fan that wasn't on, and for the drip that wasn't there. A few thin seconds that felt borrowed. They sprinted to their bedroom, got the door closed, and stood there to breathe. They said 10 seconds passed. Maybe less, maybe more. Then the bedroom door rattled hard. It hit the frame in a way that made them feel it in their teeth. A bang, they said. One clean bang, and then their mother's voice shot something from the hallway and their father's followed, both louder than usual. The kid opened the door, bracing for the usual questions. Where had they been? Why hadn't they called? That tone parents get when they think you're playing them. The father asked if they'd snuck out. The kid said no, they were in the basement. The word basement sounded soft in the classroom, smaller than a place. The father asked, then why was the front door open? The kids shrugged and felt their own face change. They remembered the bathroom. They looked at the door. There wasn't an eye anymore. There was a face, just at the edge, peeking. The word they used like a kid would, like a neighbor's kid who wanted to borrow sugar and then thought better of it. But the face wasn't familiar, and it felt wrong in that space, an extra piece in the picture. The kid pointed. The classroom stopped breathing for a second, or at least that's how I remember it. The parents, in the story, followed the finger to the bathroom. The bathroom door snapped inward toward the tub, the hinge giving a single dry cry, and a cold stir of air brushed their legs as the figure broke for the stairs. It moved like a decision already made. The person cut across the landing and took the steps in bounds, shoes hitting the treads flat. By the time the father cleared the threshold, the front door downstairs was already wide. Then the person was gone. That was it. No heroics, no wrestling on the porch, just the open door letting in night. No one was hurt. That was the outcome that mattered. The father told the kid to get behind him, which they did, and the mother stayed at the top of the stairs and said their name in a way that had the softness wrung out of it. Someone called the police. We waited on the landing long enough to hear tires nudge the curb and the brief cough of a radio downstairs, before the flashlight started carving up the hall. The kid told us there were questions and a flashlight inspection, and a pair of officers who made a circle of light on the bathroom tile and said things about latches and screws. One of them wrote in a small notebook with a chewed pen. They didn't find anything, didn't find anyone. The front door latch got tightened the next day, the kid said. They talked about whether to leave a light on in the hallway at night. Nobody admitted to leaving the door open in the first place. That was the part that stuck to them, the small things that added up to nothing you could use. In the classroom, I was supposed to be the adult in control. I set my marker down and it rolled until it hit the metal lip of the tray. I looked at the kid without trying to show too much of what I was thinking. The demon collector, I realized, had not been a monster imagined out of nowhere. It had been a casing built around a real night with an open door, and a face at the hinge. I didn't say that. I told them the story held together. I said the way they carried the detail about the shape at the hinge made it right in the reader's head. I kept my voice level. We talked about the mechanics of fear for the rest of the hour. We talked about how to make time stretch without using the word slow. We agreed we wanted to build the character out. The idea was to make the collector capable of forcing doors to behave like curtains and thoughts to feel like objects someone else could reach and pocket. The other kids got serious in a way I hadn't seen from them when we did grammar drills. They took turns offering lines and then taking them back. One kid tapped the eraser of a pencil against their teeth. Another sat cross-legged in the chair, which is against the rules, but no one corrected them. We drew on a whiteboard until it looked like a roadmap for a town that didn't exist yet. We kept the pieces that came from the night as they were. The stairwell light, the bathroom's position, the open door downstairs, the father's question, the way the door moved. We didn't add a chase that never happened. We didn't make the face speak because it didn't. We let uncertainty do the job. A story can hold more than facts and still obey them. I walked back to my car after that period ended. It was one of those late afternoons when the sky already looks tired, The parking lot had a few crows moving between light poles, and the wind was light and constant. I unlocked my door, got in, and sat with my hands on the steering wheel. My sticky note with the title was back in my campus apartment on the corner of a messy desk. I pictured it against the aluminum of my laptop case. The adhesive was already collecting dust at the edges. I called my mother that night. I didn't bring up the facility because I don't, but I asked her if we ever had a door blow open when I was a kid. She reminded me of a winter where the latch stuck and the wind took the storm door so hard it cracked the glass. She said I cried because I thought someone had come in. I could picture the winter window fogging at the corners and the white tape on the cracked pane, a detail I wouldn't have remembered if she hadn't said it. When I went back to class the next day, the kid was waiting with a sketch. It wasn't the collector. Not exactly. It was the hinge, the bathroom door drawn at a slant like it was already in motion, and a simple dark oval where the face might have been if you had the nerve to shade it in. I told them it worked. I told them the story would work if we kept the line tight. They shrugged like it wasn't a big thing. I watched them chew a thumbnail until the skin went a little raw and had to look away. In the end, the burglar, if that's who he was, got away. That's all. They could have hurt someone. They didn't. The kids slept with the bedroom door cracked after that, they said. Some nights they faced the door and some nights they faced the wall. That wasn't the point. The point is you don't always get to pick what keeps you safe. The point is a face at the seam of a door in the dark can remake how you imagine time passing for a while. We spent 2 weeks developing the piece. We learned not to make the collector into a god. We made it a trespasser, nothing more than a pair of hands that could make things move how they shouldn't. We learned to write what we could prove and leave the rest in the air. By the end, the sticky note on my laptop had curled to a little yellow flag. I peeled it off and smoothed it flat on a notebook page. I checked the doors at my apartment that night. I turned the deadbolt and then pressed the door with my palm to feel the give. The window above the sink rattled in its frame when the furnace came on. It didn't amount to more than a noise. I turned off the kitchen light and watched the rectangle of the hallway shift when my eyes adjusted. Somewhere in the hallway a hinge ticked as the heat shifted the wood, an almost sound you only catch when everything else has gone quiet. I used to think of our guest apartment as a kind of quiet, high shelf in the house. You could set a life up there, out of reach of the mess while you figured out what to do next. When my boyfriend asked if his best friend could stay for a while, I said yes. The man was in the middle of a divorce. His wife had told him to leave. I wanted to believe it was just a bad season and not the whole weather of his life. For the first few weeks, the rhythm was ordinary. He came and went. He said he was working on quitting the things that had put cracks in his marriage. He kept going back over to his almost former wife's place, trying to talk his way into a different version of the past. I didn't love that. It seemed like if change was coming, it would come from him, not from her deciding to forget. 3 weeks in, a Thursday or Friday evening, warm and still, we were making margaritas in the kitchen. The house held a still, cool air that evening, the kind that makes you notice the hum in the fridge more than usual. We figured he might be lonely up there, so we texted him, told him to come down. When we didn't hear back, we sent another. Then I tried calling. No answer. We clinked ice, salted rims, stood around with that small impatience that comes from waiting on someone you're trying to be kind to. After an hour, we decided to go up and check. His car was parked by the guest place, so at least he wasn't out driving distracted and sad. We knocked on the apartment door. Nothing. We started to think maybe he'd let himself into our side, the main house, like he sometimes did, and was waiting on the couch with the TV on low. He was there, but not how we expected. I turned the knob, and we walked into our living room. Between the couch and the tall bookshelf, he lay on his side, curled in a way that made him look smaller than he was. His knees were tucked toward the couch as if he'd slid there on purpose. One sock heel showed a gray smear from the rug. A paperback had slipped off the bottom shelf and lay face down near his hand. For a second I thought he was asleep, the kind where you've slid down out of a sitting position. Then I took a step closer and saw how still his face was. I knelt. I said his name. His free arm jerked, a loose flail. Relief came and then doubt. I spoke again. He tried to answer. The sounds weren't words, they came out thick and bent. I leaned in, and in the way his mouth didn't match the sounds, I recognized it. My job then was in-home care. I'd been around strokes. There is a feel to them. A minute gets heavy and strange. I called 911. I gave our address. I told the dispatcher he was having a stroke. I fumbled the unlock screen twice and had to wipe my thumb on my shirt before the call went through. While we waited, the room's silence grew heavy. The TV's black screen held my reflection until the distant siren braided itself into the quiet. Saying it plainly gave me something to hold on to while we waited. The paramedics came fast, 20 minutes at most, but it was the long kind of fast where the air in the room doesn't feel the same. They brought the gurney through the front door, past the bookshelf, past the dusty leaves of the plant that needed water. There was a small scuff on the wall that I'd been meaning to wipe off. All of that present and useless. They worked around him, spoke in short lines to each other, asked me what I'd seen, how long he'd been down. I didn't know. I told them what I knew. In the car, following the ambulance to the hospital, my boyfriend gripped the wheel and told me there had been smaller episodes over the last couple of weeks. Slurred words, a hand not working right, moments that passed. He said he had tried to take his friend in once, but the man wouldn't go. He asked my boyfriend not to tell anyone, and because loyalty tugs hard when you've shared a lot of years, he'd kept it quiet. He kept looking at the red lights ahead of us like they had answers. They didn't. I didn't say anything for a while. I watched the reflection of the ambulance on the hood and thought about how a person's body tries to warn them. They admitted him to the ICU. For the next day and a little more, everything was monitors and soft shoes, and the kind of lighting that makes you think time itself is nursing a headache. I went back the next afternoon, on my way between clients. I was in my scrubs, my keys on a lanyard against my chest. I wore that every day, had for years. At the ICU door, I pressed the bell. A nurse came to let me in. As the door buzzed, I glanced left. In the window of a small waiting room, behind thick plexiglass, a woman stood with her hands held together at her waist like she was trying to warm them without a heater. Her hair was medium brown, frizzy from humidity or neglect, down past her shoulders. The window had a film of hospital shine, and for a second I saw my badge ghosted over her face. The plastic square laid across those eyes like a second, thinner lid. What caught me were her eyes. They were dark with an old fear, as if what she was afraid of had been following her for a long time and had finally caught up. The circles underneath them looked bruised, as if something had been pressing on her from the inside. I didn't need an introduction to know who she was. Inside, he was awake and restless. He kept reaching down to his catheter, the way a person pulls at tape without intending to. The nurse was there. She put a hand on the bed rail. She spoke to him, and then pushed something clear through the port on his IV. His breathing calmed a notch. She gave me a nod that said I could speak if I wanted. I told him I hoped he would get better. I told him we were thinking about him and that the dog missed him rattling the treat can, which was true. I said we'd watered the plant in the apartment and that his car was fine in the drive. When there isn't much you can change, you hand over a small piece of the ordinary and hope it's enough to hold on to for a minute. His eyes slid toward me and away. He was drifting. I stood there until I felt the catch in his chest smooth out again. On my way out, the nurse was bringing the woman I'd seen in the window toward his room. They moved slowly, the nurse speaking as they went, and I stepped to the side to give them space. The corridor was clean in that antiseptic way that tries to convince you of order. I was 2 doors down when I heard the first sound of the woman's crying. It was small at first, a sound she seemed to keep close to herself. The nurse's voice lowered further as she explained the test result. The nurse's voice lowered carried enough words for me to know. The test had come back. He had drugs in his system. He died the next day. His body had been running at a deficit for years. The big event had taken what it needed. People called and stopped by. My boyfriend and I stood in our kitchen and answered the same questions, made the same motions with our hands. I kept thinking I might have been the last person to talk to him when he was fully aware. That fact sat beside me on the couch when I watched TV, stood in the pantry when I reached for flour. I tried not to rewrite it. I tried not to turn it into a story where I saved him by saying a right sentence at the right time. I didn't. I was just there when I was there. I thought about the woman in the window and the way the circles looked under her eyes. There are marks you can see and marks you can't. We are all walking around with both. I thought about how easy it is when someone asks you not to tell to agree, because it feels like love. It feels like keeping them safe, but there are times when silence throws a blanket over a fire instead of water. After the funeral, my boyfriend boxed up the things from the guest apartment. A pair of boots, a picture frame he hadn't taken out of the moving box, a handful of receipts piled on the dresser like drifted leaves. We wiped the dust off the laces of his boots before packing them, a reflex that didn't change a thing. We carried it all down to the garage. He kept the car key by the back door for a while, hanging from a little hook, until one morning it wasn't there. I didn't ask what he did with it. We have to choose what we carry. A week later, I put on my scrubs and looped the lanyard over my head the same as I always had. The keys tapped the plastic of my badge when I walked. In the bathroom mirror, I smoothed the wrinkle across my shoulder, then let it alone. There are some things you can press, and they will lie flat. There are other things you learn to wear differently. When I lifted the lanyard, the badge flipped and caught a rectangle of morning light. For a second, the laminate glare looked like the ICU pane. Then it turned and became only plastic again. I picked up my bag, turned off the light, and locked the door behind me. Then I went to work. I grew up in Diggs, in Matthews County, a place made of 2-lane roads and long flat light. The bay sat out there like steady glass, and most days you could hear a small wind work through the trees before you saw the water. We had the Chesapeake Bay as our horizon, a sheet of water that looked like a quiet fact you could live your whole life beside. People told stories about the town's name and what lived in the trees. I treated those like mosquitoes, annoying, always around, easy to swipe away. I was 9 the day it happened. It was a Saturday without much shape. We usually fished early, but Dad said the fish weren't moving at 2 in the afternoon, and he was right. The bay is a body with its own schedule. We waited for the heat to slip off the water. Then we went. He parked on the shoulder of a back road. No houses, just a stand of trees between us and the shore, and we walked down to the little pocket of beach where he liked to cast. Dad set a minnow on the hook, let the reel hum, and we sat quiet. The wind off the water tasted clean, like it had been rinsed. He landed a couple of small fish and frowned at the reel when the line went stiff for no good reason. He said something under his breath, and started taking the thing apart with his pocket knife, one piece pressed against his knee. He hated quitting more than losing, and the light was sliding toward a darker gold by the time the spool spun right again. He cast once, twice, and got a decent catch, the kind he called supper-sized. I watched him fold the fish into the cooler with that quick carefulness he had for living things. The sun tilted. The shadows on the trees behind us thickened into one long band. I asked if we could go. I tried to sound casual, but it came out thin. I'd never been out that late with him, not past the point where the water and the sky share one color. He looked at me and said we'd pack up. His mouth tipped like he was going to tease me, then didn't. He wiped his hands on a rag and snapped the cooler shut. There wasn't a proper path back to the car. You had to cross the grove on foot, a scatter of pines and crooked oaks, the ground soft with needles and old leaves. We stepped into the shade, and the temperature dropped the way it does when a cloud moves over you on an open field. The ground gave under my sneakers with that quiet spring of old needles, and something resin sweet hung in the air, a clean sharpness like fresh-cut sap. Dad walked ahead with the cooler and the rod, and I trailed behind, counting the crunches our shoes made. The car sat somewhere beyond, just out of sight, a shape waiting in the dim. Halfway in, Dad stopped. He turned his head like he was listening for a word he knew. I didn't hear anything but the small sounds of a place being itself, a twig letting go, the water muffled by distance. He put the rod down without looking and lifted me. It surprised me. I was too old to be carried. His arms were steady, but I felt the change. The little tremor in the muscle near his elbow, the way his breath held itself. He wet his lips like they'd gone dry. I felt his chest hitch once against my back before he steadied it. His eyes were wider than usual and fixed toward the right, deeper in the trees. I asked what was wrong. He didn't answer, just put a finger close to his mouth and moved. He walked fast but soft, as if speed could be quiet. I could see the car through a break in the branches. The long stretch of empty road beyond it had that end-of-day shine, a single strip of light running along the edge of the asphalt. Then the words came, carried thin through the trunks, too close and too far at once, and the laugh that followed seemed to touch my ribs from the inside. The sound hit the trees and came back wrong. It took the shape of a laugh but carried something else. Dad lurched forward. The door handle clacked under his hand. He pulled the driver's door and pushed me in across the seat. The cooler tumbled and banged my knee. He didn't sit. He braced one hand on the frame and kept his hip wedged against the swinging panel. As the car clawed forward, gravel ticking like hail under the tires, I grabbed the armrest and felt the air pull at the open side. The trees slid away. If the voice followed, the sound of the motor drowned it. We drove like that, the wind pressing hard on our faces. He slowed only when the road widened and the fields opened on both sides. He eased over where the shoulder widened beside an old metal sign with peeling paint, the kind you stop noticing until you need somewhere to stop. He left the engine running and leaned forward against the wheel. His shoulders heaved once, twice. Sweat ran along his jaw and disappeared into his collar. He shut the door with his foot after a moment. As if remembering it was still open, we sat and listened to the engine tick at idle. A single bug knocked itself against the inside of the windshield, making a sound like a small coin tapped on glass. "What was it?" I asked. My voice sounded younger than I wanted it to. He kept looking at the road. Finally, he said he wasn't sure. In the last thin light, he'd seen a man or something that read as a man. The figure was hunched and chewing. The object in his hands was a bird. It wasn't dead. The wings were beating against his wrists like a trapped fan blade. He said it steady, like reporting on the weather. He swallowed and said there was something long hanging at the figure's waist. He said it looked like a blade, the old kind, the kind you'd tie on. He didn't say sword. He didn't have to. His hands were clean but smelled faintly of fish and metal. We drove home the long way. The roads between fields were empty, and the water at the edges of ditches shone with the last scraps of sky. Dad took a turn too wide and corrected it, his hand shaking. I wanted to look behind us, but didn't. The cooler bumped in the back like it was restless. At home, the porch light made a small circle on the steps. He carried the gear inside and set it down like it might break. He put water on for tea and left the burner off. He took off his cap and looked at the inside of it as if it could help. When I asked again, he shook his head. He said all the details he'd given me and no more. He called the sheriff's office, the general number on the county mailers, and told it plain steady as he could. He stood by the wall phone and told the story to a voice in a room we couldn't see. He stayed precise. He said the time, the place near the bay, the grove where the ground dips a little before the road. He didn't say the laugh. He didn't say the words. He ran a hand through his hair and kept his eyes on the floor while he listened to the person respond. He said, "Sure, sure, all right." He hung up. He didn't say anything. He sat down hard and then got back up because his leg had fallen asleep. 2 days later, a deputy knocked on the door in the late morning. He had the polite distance of someone trained to set people at ease and keep them away at the same time. He asked Dad to tell it again, and Dad did, the way you repeat a sequence of steps to make sure the machine runs when you turn it back on. The deputy's pad stayed small in his hands. He said they'd take a look, but that folks called all kinds of things a man. In the trees at dusk, he said there were kids who liked to scare each other. He didn't say anything about a blade. He thanked us and left a little card we didn't need. That night I lay in bed and listened to the house settle. The sound of tree frogs came in through the window screen. Every time a car passed on Buckley Hall Road, if one did at that hour, the light moved along the ceiling like a slow scene being stitched. I tried to picture an ordinary explanation, and couldn't hold one. I was old enough to know that you can't always make a clean shape of a thing. I counted breaths the way we counted steps through the grove. I stopped at 10 and started again because I couldn't remember if I was doing it right. I didn't ask to fish for a while after that. When we went again, it was earlier, and we took a different path that skirted a salt pond and a patch of scrub where the ground was open and low. Dad said nothing about it. He just steered us that way as if he always had. He let me hold the rod when the line went still, and told me it was okay to reel in if I wanted to. A gull walked along the shore, and looked like it was inspecting our technique. I snorted at its seriousness, and then felt bad for laughing out loud, as if noise might bring something. We talked about school and the rain and the fact that the hay bales along the road were wrapped in white plastic now and looked like giant marshmallows. He smiled at that. He said the county was changing and staying the same, both at once. He kept his eyes on the water because that is where his eyes had been pointed since he was a boy. I saw the grove often after that. We passed it on our way to the market, to the hardware store where they kept a coffee can under the counter full of bent nails you could have for free. The trees kept their own time. In winter, you could see through them to the bay like looking through a warped window. In summer, they thickened and hid the water completely, so you had to walk in to hear it. We never saw anyone there again. We never heard that voice. I learned slowly to carry both facts that people told stories to make sense of dark places, and that sometimes the dark places tell a story without asking. It didn't turn into a family legend we had to touch every holiday. It just went on a shelf in my mind, a thing that happened once and then never again. Now, when I drive that road, I look ahead and keep my hands light on the wheel. If the light is right, I can find that stretch without thinking. There's a little drop in the shoulder and a ragged patch of cattail. Sometimes I pull over just long enough to crack the window and test the air. Even in heat, it runs a shade cooler along that line of trees. The way a room feels when someone has just stepped out. The engine has a way of settling into itself after a few miles, like everything does when it's pointed home. I check the mirror, not because I expect to see anything, but because every driver does. Then I face forward and go on. The snow held the last of the day's light even after the sky let it go. Winter had moved the clock without asking. By late afternoon, the hills already held their own dusk, and the dog's breath showed before mine. Up in the hills above the park, the dog nosed through the crusted weeds, and I kept to the track I knew, the one that snaked past the frozen meadow and the line of birch and fir. When the sun slipped, it didn't fade. It was like someone shut a door. One minute there was a blue edge to everything, and the next there wasn't. I told myself I knew the way back. The cold had stiffened the ground. The dog's collar clicked against her tags and then went quiet. It was in the open part, where a field lays out a flat with knee-high grass, now stiff and rimed, that something in the air went off kilter. The dog's tags gave one small click and went still, and even the grass seemed to stop whispering. The silence came on like it had weight. I don't mean there were no sounds. I mean the usual sounds, wind between stalks, a distant creak. A plane you can't see didn't count for much. My body knew it before I had words. The sense of being watched wasn't a thought, not even a fear. It was a fact, the same way you know your name when someone says it. I turned and saw him. In the distance, set in the dark, a figure stood there with no light on him at all. The night around us had depth, a few shades of black, and he was the darkest thing in it. My stomach dropped away like I'd stepped off a rung. My feet forgot themselves. I couldn't move. The dog pressed against my leg and made a sound I'd never heard from her. A thin, tight whine that meant she understood before I did. I don't know why I knew he was coming for me. Maybe it was the way he didn't shift or wave or make himself known. Just stood and took me in. Maybe it was the field itself, how far it stretched with no cover, and how I was halfway through it. I got the leash in my hand, though I don't remember taking it out. I said okay, and we ran. We did not run pretty. We ran because there was nothing else. The path drops and rises in that part, weaving between small humps of scrub oak and the occasional boulder that the ice has lifted over the years. I cut across the grass and then back to the trail, and then off again. The dog dragged at my arm, and I let her. My chest burned right away. I didn't look back because I didn't need to. I knew what the back would show. My breath made steam that blew sideways. I remember thinking not words but measurements. Another rise, then the bend with the fallen log, then the old fence line with the rusted posts. Keep moving. The world had narrowed to these steps. It's a longer way in daylight, when you notice the knots in the trunks and the way the creek under ice keeps its voice, when you stop to call the dog from a scent. That night the distances folded up. The dog ranged to the end of the leash, and then swung back to me in a rough rhythm that kept me upright. My legs shook on the downhills. In the hollows the cold sank and bit at the throat, and then we'd climb and I'd feel sweat under my hat, and then we'd drop again. My hand would sting later. The cold had gone past my skin and set in the joints. A switchback leads to the parking lot at the top. It's laid out in tight cuts because the hill face is steep, and if you go straight you slide or you fall. I hit the first turn and felt the ground tilt under the thin snow. There were old boot prints, maybe from earlier that day, frozen into shallow cups. I took those where I could for grip. The switchback stacks on itself there, side by side, so you can see the paths above and below. On the second turn, my boot slid a hand's width and caught on the frozen cup of an old print. A quick jolt that rang my teeth and kept me honest. I could hear my own feet and the dog's paws laying down a 4-beat that sounded like more than two bodies. The sound folded back at us from the stacked cuts of trail, the way noise will bounce in cold, and for a second it felt like more than two. The lot lights weren't on. The city had cut them or they'd gone out. I don't know. I knew where my car was by habit. The battery fob had a light, but I didn't press it. I told myself to keep my head, not to waste a step. The ground rose and then leveled and rose again. The dog's leash sawed across my palm. I'd lost my glove somewhere and hadn't noticed. My hand would sting later. At the last turn I looked down. It wasn't a plan. My body wanted proof, and it took it. He was there, on the inside of the switchback, coming straight up the slope. He didn't take the path like the rest of us. He cut the hill like it was nothing, knees driving, arms close, making a line for me. I could make out the way he moved. No slide, no stumble, no hands on the ground for balance. He had chosen speed over sense. He had chosen to make himself a message. I said, "Get away from me," and it came in chopped pieces between breaths. My free hand lifted without thinking. Palm out like that ever helped anyone? He didn't answer. That was a kind of answer. The dog barked once, sharp, and then low. I turned and put everything I had into the last run. At the top, the lot opened as an empty plate. My car sat alone under a skin of frost. There should have been other cars. There had been plenty before. Maybe the weather had chased them out early. Maybe I had read the wrong day on the ranger's sign. There were no other cars in the lot, and the pole lights that usually threw a weak sodium wash were dark. Whether burned out or cut, I couldn't tell. The keys were in my pocket under 2 zippers and a flap. My fingers had gone thick with cold. I got hold of the ring and my nails scraped the fabric, and the keys came out and slipped. They hit the blacktop with a sound I will always know. Metal on cold, small and crisp and echoing, and then skittered under the bumper. I could have cried. I don't mean from emotion. I mean from heat, behind the eyes that felt like it would break something. I dropped to my knees and the dog circled and pulled, pulling my shoulder with her. My breath fogged and then cleared and fogged again. I slid my hand along the ground into the grit and the old salt, and felt Shape's pebbles, a cigarette filter, the lip of the license plate bracket, and then the keys. My knuckles knocked the plate and set up a little tin rattle. I got them and stood, and the world narrowed to a keyhole. The first try missed. The second try found it. I opened the driver's door, gripped the dog by her collar, bundled her in, and swung myself after her. The door was half shut when his shadow hit the side window. I got the door closed and pressed the lock button with my elbow. The click sounded thin. He was there at the window, breathing fog onto the glass. There are things you remember and are certain of. I am not certain of his face. I remember the way his jacket scraped against the glass. I remember the smell of diesel, fresh and heavy, like the fumes you catch when a big engine is warming up. For a second, we looked at each other through the window. I know that's impossible to put right. The glass was fogged inside from my breath and his outside. But there is a way that presence comes through. The dog was between the front seats, half on the console, silent now, pressed forward as if she could make herself a wall. There were no other cars in the lot. The lines were clean of tracks except ours. If I thought about it later, and I did over and over, I gave myself small reasons. He could have parked lower, at a trailhead I couldn't see from here. He could have been out for his own reasons, late like me. He could have decided to scare me because he could, and because sometimes people do that. Those are possible things. What I knew then was simple. He didn't go for the path, and he didn't answer when I told him to stop, and he was close enough to touch my door. He turned and ran. He didn't run away from me so much as toward his truck, which I hadn't seen because it sat 2 spaces over, with its nose into the dark, tucked behind the lot's low rise, so the cab was a shadow until I moved. He got in fast. The truck coughed alive on the first turn, and the idle shook the whole lot. He put his foot down hard. I saw the rear end dip and the tailpipe belch out a ribbon of black that hung low before the cold took it. He cut the wheel tight, rear tires chirping, then biting, and a low belt whine rose under the diesel as a black seam unrolled behind him. He swung out, tires chirping, then lost and found traction in one move. He didn't look back. He took the exit that drops to the park road and was gone in a line of noise that fell away. I stayed where I was. I didn't turn the car on. I tried to text someone and fumbled the unlock screen 3 times, watching my own hands not listen to me, then set the phone face down and just breathed. The dog climbed into my lap like she'd never learned she was too big for that. My hands shook. I could not make them stop by wanting to. My teeth had that nervous clack like I was freezing, but I wasn't cold anymore. I tried to count my breaths and lost track. I watched my own reflection in the dark window and saw it shift as the frost started back in thin veins from the corners. Time felt strange after that. The parking lot held its shape. The switchback lay quiet, not even the small sounds of melt. Somewhere on the slope a small slide let go and whispered to a stop, and for a moment I thought it was a footfall and then knew it wasn't. The night showed me small things you miss, how a bit of trash will lift and settle, how a branch will let go its weight of snow all at once, how a light miles away will pulse as something crosses between it and you. I thought about driving down, and then I didn't. I thought about calling someone, but what would I say that would hold? That wouldn't sound like I was telling a story. At some point the dog eased off my lap and settled on the back seat, chin on my coat. I moved to the driver's side and turned the engine over. The heater came up slow and then steady. The windshield cleared in a shape that grew from the bottom. I watched the black line of the hill become a ridge, then a slope, then a place again. The sky had a little gray in it at the horizon, the kind that means the dark has agreed to leave, but not just yet. When I drove down the switchback, I kept to the cuts, low gear, tires ticking over the patched seams. At the bottom, I let the car idle and looked once toward the field, and then away. On the road out, I passed the dark mouths of the other trailheads. A plow had gone through hours earlier and left a ridge. The park sign, the one with the map and the rules, stood up out of the snow like it had always been there. My reflection moved along it as I rolled by. I told myself I could make it into a lesson that wasn't just fear. The body paid attention first and saved me time. My thoughts would have wasted. I don't think that's wisdom so much as remembering what you are. You are a person in the dark with a dog and a hill to climb. You are someone who knows the shape of your own keys in your hand. You are someone who can be wrong about many things and still right about leaving. I don't go up there late anymore in winter. That isn't a vow, it's just what happens when a place has shown you one of its faces. Sometimes I take the dog to the lower trails where the trees are closer, and the way out is straight. She walks ahead and looks back at me, checking, and I raise a hand. The air can be as still as glass, and it can break just as fast. I park where other cars are. I watch for small things. I let the day shrink in its own time and leave when it says so. The last thought I have before sleep most nights is not any kind of story. It's the crisp sound a dropped key makes on cold pavement, and the shape of a hill that people worked hard to carve into sensible turns. I try to hold on to that, then I let it go,